Folks, hello and welcome. Good afternoon. We are about to start the webinar for InfoTech's 2021 CIO Priorities Report. The report this year is focused on driving enterprise resilience during uncertain times. Now, before we get started, we've got some housekeeping items that we'd like to cover off first. To start, all members of this webinar are muted to make sure that we can hear all the presented content. I would like to encourage you to post any questions, comments, or technical challenges in the Q&A section, which you should see to the right of your screen. We will be monitoring the Q&A and will answer some questions at the end of the session. However, if we don't get to your questions, don't worry. We will be sending out a FAQ to all attendees after the session. Now, along with that FAQ, we will also send you a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. Now, in terms of the webinar, we've got three key objectives. The first is we'd like to discuss our theme for this year's report, that being resilience, and review the 5 CIO priorities for 2021 based upon this theme. Our second objective is we want to understand the socioeconomic and political drivers that have informed our choice of priorities. And finally, we would like to engage in a broader discussion about the role of IT in facilitating enterprise resilience in light of these priorities. Just a little bit about InfoTech, for those of you who might be new to us. InfoTech Research Group produces unbiased and highly relevant research to help leaders make strategic, timely, and well-informed decisions. We partner closely with your teams to provide everything they need, from actionable tools to analyst guidance, ensuring they deliver measurable results for the organization. Now, before we get started, I would like to introduce the webinar presenters. And before I forget, I need to introduce Craig O'Hara. He will be helping with any technical issues that you might come up with. So please message Craig if you have an issue. Myself, I'm the hairless one, David Glazer, research lead at InfoTech in the CIO practice, and I'm very, very pleased to have two wonderful co-hosts and presenters today. Susan Noyles, our executive counselor from the Executive Service Group, and Travis Duncan, the research director from the PPM practice, who is actually also the author of this report. So let's kick this thing off here. We're all very eager to define this current moment as post-COVID-19, but unfortunately, that's still a little bit premature, since the socioeconomic forecast for 2021 looks anything but stable. Now, within this, the CIO of 2021 needs to be a source of enterprise resilience, enabling the organization to rebound from the year that was, while at the same time preparing for unforeseen needs and demands. Now, resilience is something that is earned. It's not the result of heroics. It's the result of good planning. For example, living within your means today so you can address your needs tomorrow. The neglect of resilience has been observed through untested DRPs, and security plans, neglected infrastructure, overcommitted project resources, and an absence of succession planning and things of that nature. Depending on who you ask, this is a concept that business culture has largely moved away from. We've been prioritizing efficiency very much in terms of business strategies, and this has come at the cost of resilience. Now, in 2021, this dynamic must give way to resilient planning. And successful CIOs will be those who demonstrate vigilance and enable the organization to better confront what is coming. And this is going to happen through 5 key areas. The first is creating an appropriate budget reserve to better respond to unforeseen demands. The second is refocusing IT risk planning to mitigate emerging threats. The third is strengthening organizational change management, or OCM, capabilities to maximize technology investments. The fourth is establishing capacity awareness to optimize resource utilization. And the fifth and final, last but not least, priority is keeping emerging technologies in view in order to be able to capitalize on innovation opportunities as they come. Let's get started with the first priority here, the need for financial resilience, which is probably the most obvious priority for the year ahead if we look at the economic indicators. Now, the impact on major economies from the pandemic has been 4 times worse than that of the 2008 global financial crisis. G20 governments have already spent an unprecedented $7.6 trillion and counting on fiscal stimulus packages. The recessions in most major economies, the unclear and untested logistics of the vaccine rollout, and numerous other factors are driving the need for a more conservative approach towards IT spending and budgeting. In fact, by the end of 2020, we saw that IT budgets had actually decreased by 2.5%, and we're expecting a probable additional decrease by about 0.5%. Hopefully that's it in 2021. Now, Travis, what else can you tell us about this priority here?
Yeah, so what I'll do, Dave, is just jump into sort of the drivers that caused us to choose this priority, as opposed to other options. And the first priority, well, you've already addressed it somewhat in your introductory remarks. All financial indicators point toward volatility. I don't think this will surprise anyone at this point, but I will say, the statistics that we compiled in our research it might raise an eyebrow or two just how grave the uncertainty and volatility are. So that was the first driver, but the second one, in addition to that, looks at the uncertainty around where we'll be working in 2021. Is it going to be home? Is it going to be office? At this point, it's looking like a mix of both, if we're lucky at this point. So CIOs will need to remain flexible in terms of continuing to support a kind of remote work strategy versus the need to possibly reignite the HVAC system when that time comes to return to the office. The third driver that really chose us to zero in on this is technology uncertainty. So a lot of IT departments just kind of got through 2020, keeping the business running without actually addressing any technology problems, technology needs. So as remote work persists into 2021, the problems associated with aging and decaying devices, hardware systems will become harder for IT leaders to predict and prepare for. So that's what's driving the need to prepare for more, I guess, known unknowns than past years, as well as for, as we'll see in our next priority, more unknown unknowns than previous history. For each of our priorities, we didn't just look at the drivers and the stats around each of them, but we also consider some of the risks in implementing them, like some things to be aware of if you are to action this priority. So for creating an appropriate budget reserve, the risks are primarily around stakeholder management to start with. So following through on this priority might entail having difficult conversations with stakeholders about what can and cannot be accomplished in the year ahead. So inevitably, not all sponsors and business units will be happy about this. Frontline staff might bear some of the brunt of the pushback. So, equipping those staff with the knowledge and scope of what's happening at the departmental level will help provide context. Missed opportunities. So we're coming through a paradigm where, the sole function of the business is to make profit, and this idea of saving capital for a rainy day doesn't necessarily sit neatly within that. Will you miss out on potential? Potentially. So lean on a structured business prioritization approach to ensure that spending is in pursuit of that which is most viable and valuable. And then just knowing how much of a reserve is enough. Definitely, I think more art than science for most organizations, and it's often industry specific. So in terms of tackling this, it might help to think through the difference between a kind of traditional budget reserve, that kind of rainy day fund that's typically thought in terms of absolutes. We need this much of reserve to get through a rough patch of this long, versus like a management reserve, the time, money, or budget that leadership sets aside for the parts of a project that can't be predicted. So one approach might be better than the other for your organization, or you might need a mix of both. But in terms of determining the best approach, it's rather delicate and context specific. So Susan, I think now's a good time to bring you into this. Are there any best practices in this area that CIOs can lean on?
Yeah, if I were advising some of my counselor clients, some of the things I would ask them to pay attention to is ensuring that there are principles established with all of the stakeholders regarding the development of the contingency, the usage and purpose. You need to make sure that everybody understands the rules of the road regarding that contingency, so it's not perceived as an IT slush fund. And obviously your funding model and cost structure are going to drive the appropriate sources and approvals for those contingency amounts. And make sure that your in-flight projects are assessed for whether they should have some contingency budget and input into them. And do you need to scope change that? Which brings me to portfolio disciplines regarding your project portfolio. Risk management and project budget forecasting, there needs to be an emphasis on that in the coming year, the discipline within your organization, the maturity in that practice, and making sure that that is tightly managed with your stakeholders, that they are aware of where the project risks are and where the contingency budget is and where the project budget is. Back to you, David.
Thanks so much, Susan. So a big theme there is this idea of having discipline. Now, in 2020, most organizations were playing catch up in terms of IT risk management and business continuity planning, two disciplines that are really important to building resilience. Even the most creative of risk forecast at the start of the year could have never foreseen the extent of the disruption that was to come. The start of 2021 is a time to redouble IT risk management to bring it up to the standards of our new normal. Indeed, if the last year has taught us anything, it's that no black swan should be off the table in terms of scenarios or possibilities for disruption. If we look back at the year that just was, 75% of companies reported supply chain disruptions in 2020, and cyber crimes have gone up by a factor of magnitude. 300% has been the increase in cyber crimes over the past year. So a lot of reasons to refocus IT risk planning. Travis, let's dig into these drivers a bit more.
Sure. Well, I think the first one sort of piggybacks off of what you just mentioned. The cost of the average security incident or data breach can be quite high. So during a year when the spotlight will be on responsible constricted spending, investments in a risk management program should be seen as sound upfront investments against fortifying the organization against far greater costs. Security risks are more in the spotlight than ever. So the recent SolarWinds cyber attack should have alerted us all to the fact that the health crisis isn't the only very real global threat at the moment. So with the level of discourse around cybersecurity heightened and the threat around it sort of a very real and palpable one, CIOs should kind of get their security infrastructure in order. And then the other driver here was really the continued supply chain disruptions. So 2020 was sort of the most challenging year in living memory for global supply chains. COVID-19 exposed many of the weaknesses, the cracks and fissures within the existing industry supply chains. So, I didn't speak to too many clients who weren't experiencing some form of inventory issues and delays. So the new normal demands a more proactive approach to inventories and a set of supply chain processes for sensing and responding to continuous disruption, unplanned events, those types of things. So those were the real drivers. Now, in terms of the risks, if we were talking about moving this forward, from a security perspective, building up resilience on the risk side will require multiple points of vigilance, be they phishing scams, ransomware attacks, cloud breaches, threats targeting workers' devices, that are patched and managed centrally by IT. So you'll need to be vigilant against those just on the security side. A lack of qualified cybersecurity staff. So staffing is a theme that might come up again as we go through this research. But I think on the cybersecurity side is perhaps most palpable. So as enterprise executives are seeking to add security personnel for the year ahead, the supply just isn't there to meet it. So the World Economic Forum recently declared that I think nowhere is the workforce skills gap more pronounced than in cybersecurity. So IT departments will need to fight to attract from a limited pool of qualified resources, or else work to build up those skills internally. Stakeholder alignment is the last one here. It's just getting the organizational leadership aligned on how to best tackle the threat landscape, on how to best mitigate the risks, or how to best mitigate this risk will really depend on, the organization and the personalities involved. So, Susan, during a year where the threat landscape is seemingly endless, how do CIOs begin to confront this topic?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's really easy to get caught up in cyber being the be all and the end all of risk management, and that's actually a bit of a blind spot for many of us. And risk management is really a discipline that needs to be embedded in all of our IT capabilities and needs to roll up into an integrated risk management program. So I suggest you scan each one of your capabilities and service areas regarding their risk management maturity and consider the cost of the exposure and focus on the top exposures to drive a risk management maturity into your organization in the coming year. Mitigation may cost you some time or some money, and you should have, as part of the rules of the road that you established around your contingency funding, have some understanding whether that maturity can be funded out of some of your contingency funds. You're going to have to run quickly on estimation in many industries, which actually leads you to a high risk of your estimates being wrong. And so preparing the ground for that by agreeing on different levels of estimation accuracy, depending on where you're at in the project life cycle, and ensuring that everybody who's at the table, all of the stakeholders, et cetera, understand what those targets are, so that you're not at the end of a project dealing with oh, that went over the estimate, or you didn't hit the mark, et cetera, et cetera. So clarity in that communication. And then also consider breaking larger projects down into smaller projects. So it doesn't make sense for a very large project to actually create a requirements development and implementation project estimation project itself. And that allows you to keep making informed decisions regarding what it is you're committing to, and allows you a little bit more control on the risk on some of these large projects, which can really get out of hand quickly. And back to my estimation point, what is the acceptable turnaround for an estimate? So in some industries, we're seeing that the demand out of the board and the C-suite is for very, very rapid turnarounds on estimates. If we did this, what does that look like from an IT perspective? And so manage those expectations and make sure that the implications on all of your resources that are dealing on in-flight projects, et cetera, are understood, and that you're on top of that. And that leads me to leveraging this burning platform to mature the governance within your organization, because governance really is about facilitating things like risk oversight, decision-making, choosing responses, et cetera. So take a look at the forums that you have around stakeholder communication, stakeholder decision-making, and invest in those to mature them. And you may be starting to hear a theme from me, which is really about keeping your stakeholders close and over-rotating on communication with them going forward. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Susan. It's very interesting. Another thing that's really interesting is this insight we got from reviewing the results of a recent survey by Deloitte in this case. They surveyed more than 3,600 executives, and within the results, it showed that 17% said that their organizations would focus on planning for unlikely and high impact events, which is up from just 6% in the year before the pandemic. So almost a threefold increase in the amount of planning that is going to start going into addressing unlikely and high impact events. Now, at its heart, resilience is having the capacity to deal with unexpected change. And organizational change management, otherwise known as OCM, can help build up this capacity at the organizational level by helping to strategically plot the known changes while leaving some capacity to absorb the unknowns as they appear. In terms of the known variables, we know that workers are facing higher levels of stress and anxiety. I'm sure that everyone listening in right now can attest to that, and that likely resonates. Also, the amount of change that an average employee can absorb without becoming fatigued has been cut in half. So our ability to withstand change has been impacted because of everything that's happening around us. And as CIOs look ahead, helping to combat this change fatigue and foster change resilience among staff should be a key leadership priority that will help drive better customer service as well as improve staff morale, which we know has an impact on productivity as well. Travis, let's unpack this a little bit more.
Yeah, okay, thanks, David. So yeah, I mean, change fatigue, it's been mentioned, I think we're all feeling it. And I think OCM, it's nice that we have this capability as a business process, because I think it can come in really, really handy at this time if we choose to invest in it. So on the change fatigue front, there's a theory in OCM called the zone of tolerance. So it's a conceptual space within, I guess, the psychology of each individual, where you can adopt and adapt to to change with minimal disruption to our sense of identity and well-being. So at this point, it's fair to say that our individual zones of tolerance have all been tested, trampled down maybe a little bit. So that's where the change fatigue is coming from. And even during the best of times and good OCM practices, changes are strategically planned within this zone at the organizational level to foster better acceptance and engagement and to help maximize the return on our project investments. So I think, for the year ahead, for organizations that aren't already benefiting from an OCM approach, it's a good time to start to invest in it. So that's sort of the most obvious driver. From a kind of people perspective, the second driver here, OCM can help maximize the return on technology investments. The constraints that drive project management are insufficient for driving the overall success of a project. It's not about whether or not you come in on time, on scope, on budget. It's about if you get the benefits from that project. So in a year when technology investments will be more constrained and perhaps heavily scrutinized, OCM can help supplement those project management practices to ensure there is a better return on the investments being made. And then OCM is a practice that can build organizational resilience. So maybe more so than any other priority in this year's report, there's a direct line connecting, OCM practices to that theme of enterprise resilience. So, at its heart, it's all about building up the capacity to, transition through change. So those were the drivers and why it seemed like an obvious choice for this year's report. In terms of the risks that we see when it comes to implementing, an OCM process, a lack of buy-in from the business tends to be the most predominant one. To be executed effectively, OCM requires, a network of sponsors, frontline managers, and other stakeholders from throughout the business. So without that level of engagement, IT, project management personnel, they can only accomplish so much on their own. A lack of resourcing to properly support OCM. So this works best when there are dedicated change management personnel to facilitate it. And unfortunately for most IT departments, this just isn't an option. It's just another set of tasks that get added to the workloads of already very, very busy staff and project management personnel. So, I think it's really about how much of this you can take on. And then the third risk is related to the above, but a slight tweak on it is, persuading people to change requires, a special set of skills, a soft, empathetic approach, comfort in dealing with uncertainty in people's emotions. And not everybody possesses that out of the gate. So it's not as though it can't be, built up, but finding the right people for the role can sometimes be a challenge. So those are the risks. Susan, how can CIOs best confront this topic of change management during a year when staff are all saturated from disruption?
Thanks, Travis. I'd like to first of all start out from your point number one regarding the business, and that IT is really good at throwing terms like agility around and applying them to IT itself. But just raising your awareness that IT cannot function in a cultural vacuum and succeed, that the partnership with the business and a joint understanding of the rules of the road and the desired culture are critical. It becomes a bit of a challenge for IT to lead from behind and change some long-held beliefs and patterns of behavior within IT and within the business. And so, you know, working with the executive team jointly to try to move that forward and maximize the agility of the entire organization is a focus area for CIOs. And I remind you of the phrase, culture will eat strategy. So you can create roadmaps that are lovely and well thought out, but if the culture isn't there to support them, they will likely come to a not good end. And speaking about risk and opportunity, there are some companies that are currently in what's considered the loser column, and while others are in the win column, depending on the industry. And I encourage you as leaders to check your thinking, to challenge yourselves to find opportunity in new ways of doing things, even if the outlook is grim, because it's not over until it's over. And your approach, your positivity, your willingness to consider new options, your acknowledgement of risk and proactive management, your partnerships, your patience, and the appropriate lack of that too. All of those behaviors are going to impact your team, your peers, and your organization. So, you know, don't lose sight of yourself as a leader and as a model of the kind of behavior and culture that you would like to see within your organization, within the greater business. And the big opportunity is leveraging this burning platform. So I don't know how many times I have seen organizations come up with artificial burning platforms, trying to move culture, trying to do organizational change management that way. And this is a situation that's very, very clearly a burning platform that everyone can rally around. So this is it. If I've ever seen one, I've been around a while. So this is very useful for explaining the why, the how quickly, the who, and what the benefit is. And this is the motivator of all motivators. If you can get your messaging aligned at the executive level and move the organization forward through this very, very challenging time. And your role is also to help translate this challenge into organizational terms and vision, and ultimately to make it personal and real for every person that you count on. And back to Travis's point about people sort of being oversaturated with change. That communication and that ability as leaders to make the message meaningful and to give people that meaning in their roles and in their lives. Why do they show up for work is very, very important right now. That's gas in the fuel tank for you as an organization and for those people personally. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Susan. Priority number 4 is about establishing capacity awareness. IT is coming out of a 10 to 15 year period where saving capacity was basically a foreign concept. Overcommitting and over-allocating resources to projects and operational tasks has been the norm for a long time now. More generally, you know, beyond just IT in the organization in general, almost 70% of workers right now feel as though they have too much work on their plates and not enough time to do it. Employees also believe that their CEOs focus too much on decisions that are based on short-term financial results and not enough time on decisions that create a stable, positive workplace for staff, which, depending on who you ask, this could be, you know, a byproduct of the Milton Friedman economic theory, where it was all about, you know, shareholder focus at the expense of all else. Some people believe that this has led to an over focus on efficiency, which might be why we're feeling this impact to resilience. Now, to help weather the uncertainty of the year ahead, CIOs will need to be effective stewards of time. And to do so, they will need to have reliable insight into the availability of their talent and their resource bandwidth. Travis, let's dig into this one.
Yeah, for sure. There's it's funny, to follow up on that Friedman quote, there's a Peter Drucker quote that's near and dear to my heart that I use, as much as I can. It says essentially, I'm going to paraphrase here, but it's there's nothing that distinguishes the effective executive as much as their tender, loving care of time. So you don't get that writing a lot anymore in business writing. I just love it. I think it's such a great quote, and I feel as though it plays out in a couple of ways. So if we look at our drivers, there is a bit of a connective tissue between this priority and the change management priority, but they are ultimately sort of separate. I mean, they're both in some ways concerned with improving employee engagement and well-being. So, as you mentioned, David, the statistics around anxiety and stress have significantly increased amongst workers. So we are carrying the stress that we're feeling in our personal lives into the office with us, or the virtual office anyways. So a capacity-aware approach to approving and scheduling tasks, should result in more empathetic level allocations of time. So that's the first driver, about taking care of our most precious resource, our people. Now, it's not just about employee well-being, although that's very important, but the economic fallout from COVID should put the spotlight back on controlling spending and the consumption of staff hours. So a capacity management process with good reporting will help ensure that approvals are made with insight into IT's ability to actually get the work done, which is a neat concept. So saying no or not yet to work, actually has the benefit of driving project throughput, getting more done. And so it's a simple concept of, if you don't put too much on people's plates at one time, we're actually more productive. So that's another driver here, doing more with less. The third point here is more accurate and usable resourcing data will help facilitate organizational resilience. So somewhat related to the point of better decision making, but I think really specific to the theme of resilience. That real-time capacity data will help CIOs make faster, more informed decisions on how to best pivot when those emergent, unforeseen demands present themselves. So those were the drivers. In terms of the risks that we cover in the report, yeah, let's call it out. Resource management optimizations often fail. I see it every week when I'm working with folks. So for many IT teams, maintaining accurate resourcing data can be difficult. Sometimes maintaining the data is often a kind of role into itself. So the key to mitigating this is to work with staff to establish or a standard of data granularity that they can sustain. And I think a higher level data is often sufficient for the purposes of capacity management. Resource management optimizations can get political. It was one of the reasons that they fail, but it's also important to call out, when executives start to inquire into where the time goes, the fear of Big Brother can sometimes creep in amongst frontline staff and managers. So, it's important leaders to communicate the problem that you're trying to resolve and the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Most specific here, like those first two risks are, universal when it comes to resource management optimizations. But the third one's kind of specific to our current moment, in that obtaining accurate resourcing data could be more difficult than usual with our current, work from home situation. So without the right tool and reporting vehicle, you're at a disadvantage here, even in the best of times, but certainly in this remote work climate. So Susan, from a CIO's perspective, how should capacity planning factor into annual planning, and how might that change or be different this year, given our current situation?
So the haves and the haves not have got a slight kind of variation on emphasis here in my mind. If you have funding, you have the means to buy capacity, additional capacity, human or otherwise. And it really becomes the typical prioritization discussion on your investment spend. And your ability to acquire and manage the extra capacity becomes a risk, becomes a focus area for you. So your vendor management capability and your vendor landscape are important to spend some time on. If you have no money, it's purely the prioritization discussion, and it's really back to my earlier point on governance and clarity of trade-offs and implications. I would advise you to make sure that you have a very crisp audit trail on the decisions regarding what is not going to happen, and that those are transparent, because it's a lot less likely to bite you back later on. When somebody turns around a year from now and says, well, IT didn't do XYZ. So there's a bit of, call it political coverage that you might want to pay some attention to. Saying no is not poor service. I think Travis brushed up against this from another angle. Saying yes and not being able to deliver is poor service, and can actually make you a critical failure point when a company is running as fast as it possibly can to gain market share or cut costs, and a window of opportunity gets missed because IT said yes to too many things. So I keep pounding on this, harnessing that governance and stakeholder relationship facility that you have to make sure that the investment options and implications are within the range of possibility. The resource forecasting that Travis was talking about is a key support around that, and make sure that it's a business decision that gets made, not an IT decision that gets made going forward. And your ability to do that estimation is really dependent on the resources and the skills needed to do the estimation, and then whether those are available to you. And resource management, time allocation, prioritization disciplines are worth a lot of attention within your team. If you can task people with that as something that they're clearly accountable for, it helps. And, you know, stopgap resourcing, where it's like, well, you know, Joe has done it once and he did it 20 years ago, can actually make a deliverable more expensive or make it take longer. So be aware of the risk around trying to do that in the effort of saying yes and trying to make your client happy. Now, and I'd also flag for you that there's a continuous learning loop that needs to be in place around your ability to forecast resource skill needs and capacity, and that you need to continuously be checking that and making sure that the people who are accountable for those processes are learning and are refining their ability to manage that cycle of people in technology investment. On to you, Dave, again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Susan. Travis, I have to try to one up your quote here. Apologies. I've got, you just made me think of one from Marcus Aurelius, okay, leader of the Roman Empire. So we're going way back, okay. So here's what Marcus thought. I'm going to paraphrase here. But any individual can do 3 things at once. If they try to do 4, they will do 2. If they try to do 5, they will do 1. And if they try to do more than 5, they will do none, which I think is really, really interesting and insightful, coming from all the way back. But this conversation also makes me think of a book that I recently read from the Harvard Business Review. It's called the 3-Box. It's called 3-Box Innovation, and essentially it posits that an organization is balancing these 3 buckets of work at any given time. The first is the things that it's doing to maximize the value of its business model in the present moment. And I think one could make the argument that a lot of organizations rotate into this and over-rotate into this. And that's where you get this real focus on decreasing operational costs and driving efficiencies, really as a sole focus. But that can sort of steer you wrong if you're not putting enough attention into the second area, which is how do we strategically deselect the things that no longer make sense for us to do because the context has changed, or it's just not economical for us to be doing this, or it's not high enough value for us to be doing this. And it's really important to put that effort in to deselect, because that is in effect what helps us make room for all of the future stuff. How do we pull the future of what our enterprise will be a little bit closer to the present? And that's really what priority number 5 is all about here, where the first 4 priorities are primarily responses to the uncertainty of the year ahead. This last type of resilience looks forward to regeneration and transitioning out of this uncertainty. 77% of CIOs identified digital transformation as their top budget priority for 2021. And increasingly, a goal of the transformation has been to accelerate AI adoption, so artificial intelligence or automated cognition, with 97% of enterprises declaring that having mature processes to deploy machine learning and AI is essential to success. It's become clear that having an up-to-date view of emerging technologies will enable the CIO to capitalize on and deploy leading-edge innovations as the business requires. So getting ahead of it, knowing what they are before the business comes to you. This responsiveness will enable the organization to adapt more quickly and competitively as the world continues to confront unprecedented social and economic challenges, and prepares for, ideally sometime soon, prepares for the post-COVID-19 world. Travis, let's talk about the drivers of this final priority here.
Sure. I'd like to one-up you with another quote, but I can't.
Oh, no.
So let's just get to the drivers. So the drivers here. The first one, 2020, was a banner year in many ways for emerging technologies. Businesses were forced to accelerate their digital transformations with the move to remote work. So IT will continue to be in the spotlight for 2021 here, as Dave referenced. 70% of organizations, this is digital transformation is a top priority. So to succeed, CIOs should remain ready to capitalize on opportunities flowing from the disruptive effects of 2020. Emerging tech will help support transformative change that many businesses are anticipating. So as part of the Tech Trends report, which was sort of the sister report to the priorities report. So if you haven't looked at it, please do. As part of that research, InfoTech deployed a survey of our user base, and of that, we found that 57% of organizations are anticipating a lot of change to transformative change for the year ahead. So as organizations face unprecedented levels of change, the ability to leverage the right emerging technology could be a differentiator. And then staying competitive post-pandemic, whenever that time may come. So, IT initiatives, really, if we think of it, they should do one of 3 things. They should either support business productivity, they should help you become a better business shop, or they should be, looking at what are the new technology enabled use cases that we're going to explore. What are the big bets we're going to make for the year ahead? So remaining tuned into emerging technologies will allow the resilient CIO to make the right big bet when the time comes. So those were the drivers here. In terms of the risks associated with this one, making the wrong technology bets. So while digital transformation and AI dominated the discourse of 2020, and will no doubt be part of it in 2021, it's too early to say exactly what technology trend will best confront what's coming in 2021. So it's partly because of this that we're advocating kind of knowledge resilience as a priority. So remaining tuned in to technology trends, ready to act on them without necessarily placing a bet until it's like, sure thing. The use of emerging technologies can proliferate shadow IT. So in many cases, business units are adopting emerging tech independently without addressing, process interdependencies with other, business units and vendors, or without, informing or collaborating with IT about these technologies. And then again, skills comes up, staffing comes up as a risk. So a shortage of IT skills to support this. Because the technology is emerging, chances are sufficient skills might not exist in-house to deploy and support many of these emerging technologies. So Susan, emerging technologies are an interesting topic even during the most unremarkable of years. How do you see them factored into the CIO landscape for 2021?
So, poor CIOs, as if they don't have enough to do. Now they've got to keep their eyes on this prize. So, the problem with emerging technologies is they may provide you with opportunity. So there's a lot of effort and time and attention that has to go into providing that filtering. And depending on your organizational maturity and funding, you may have a greater or lesser leeway at this, particularly at this point in time with all of these cost pressures or cost containment pressures. Keep your eye on this prize. So I bring you kind of back to my previous point on leadership and finding opportunity. There is a risk reward balance that you need to judge here for your time investment and for your team. But there are ways that you can be creative and keep current and aware without needing to stand up whole teams that are going to tackle innovation. And so be planful about it. It's worth some effort here to make sure you're keeping track of trends, but also are plugging those opportunities into your solutioning. So make sure that there is the integration with the business conversation, with the solutioning, with the requirements gathering, the BA teams, et cetera, that everybody understand what the potentiality is that's out there. And then leverage your vendors, not the salespeople, but the actual product managers who know what's in the pipe and what other, what their other customers are doing. And of course, our analysts who talk to people about trends day in and day out and can synthesize all of that information for you into a much tighter package and customize it for you via conversation that's easier than you having to scan the whole landscape. So leverage those kinds of tools to keep yourself and your team plugged in. Make sure you've got your finger on the pulse, but not overinvest at this point in time with money and time that you just fundamentally don't have.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Susan. So folks, thank you for staying with us thus far. We now have some time to do a little bit of Q&A, and there have been some questions that have come in through the Q&A section. I'll queue some up here for the gang. The first one I'd like to talk about is from Yogi. Now, Yogi is talking about the fact that budget cutting for IT, IT is becoming a target for budget cutting because the perception from the executives is that the costs are high. It's a perception thing, and what Yogi is positing is that you could have high consuming business units have the IT costs come from their budgets, and whether or not that would be beneficial, whether or not that could help an enabler of creating those reserves or creating those even R&D-esque funds for the emerging tech. Do you see that that type of idea being a good rebalancer? I'm curious to see how that's played out in the past and whether that might be a good tactic for the future.
Well, yeah, I'll just say, I mean, just to maybe iterate something in the report, I think it's potentially a good path forward, but this is such a nuanced priority that I think that's overcoming the perception, I think, would be the first thing to tackle there. Maybe having more proactive conversations with stakeholders around simple cost benefit around IT costs might be the good first approach there. And then again, it's so much of this, I think, as Susan got it in her comments, is around working with your colleagues to come up with the right approach here.
And that's interesting, just before Susan jumps in, because like the net amount of money being spent, it's still technically the same, right? You're just doing something creative with the accounting, right? But for the company, it's the same amount of money being spent. So it's like, does that, to what extent does that influence the perception? But Susan, please.
Your point.
Yeah, so I would flag a couple of other aspects of your organization to take a look at. Number one is your maturity regarding enterprise architecture, the process that generates a project, and your control over that technology lifecycle. I'm very much a proponent of show back and potentially share back or charge back. I believe in that. However, if you don't have the frameworks in place that allow you to contain it, what you get is a bunch of business entities, business departments running off and talking to vendors and coming to you and saying, well, I bought this, make it happen. And it just generates more chaos in your organization. So before you head down that show back, charge back path, make sure that you've got some of those other pillars addressed. The other thing is to the point we were making about saying no. So in our effort to satisfy demand, we don't actually challenge back to the business for them to justify their demand. And we don't say to them, you know, I can do priority 1, I can do some of 2, but I can't do priorities 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the more of that you put into the funnel, whether it's help desk tickets all the way to projects, the more demand and the more capacity I have to address. And that costs money. And that's money that is being taken away from potentially a more strategic investment. So forcing that back into the business decision-making forum by being able to articulate what are the categories of spend and what are those drivers behind that, and facilitating that conversation and coming to a business decision regarding what David was talking about, which are the 3 buckets, right? What do you start? What do you stop? What do you continue? And tweaking the budget that way in a joint forum as a business conversation is much more likely to be a viable approach. It's more complex, but it's much more sustainable for you in the long term.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. We've got another question here, and this one is from Nicholas Hernandez. Nicholas is asking from the perspective of those organizations that are already under duress because of a decrease in income for their business, and so under those conditions, and the pressure to reduce costs because of that type of driver, how can a IT department navigate that and still create their reserve? And I think it does probably piggyback on the saying no, maybe more vehemently. But is there anything else that we can offer for that challenge? It seems like a tough one.
I'll jump in here quickly just to say it is a tough one. I mean, you can get creative, I guess, with some of the budgeting on the project side to create those reserves. So buffer them into your project contingency plans. And then the other piece too would just be to look at some sort of cost optimization activity. So we offer a service in it where we can kind of take a look at the budget and kind of help look for areas where you could where you can minimize the pain. Let's say minimize the pain of cost cuts, and you could probably take that to a place where you could use it to find reserves as well. But those are the 2 options that come to my mind. Susan?
Right. Yep. This is ultimately it is about risk management. So you cannot address all risks all of the time. And often we have built budgets and infrastructure and processes and the things that people do. Those have kind of what I call layered up layers of sediment, accretion. And take a look, there might be some low-hanging fruit around. Challenge your management team to find that. There may be situations where you have invested in software maintenance agreements or hardware maintenance agreements, etc., that don't actually make that much sense in light of the other risks that you now need to address. And it becomes a trade-off. It really becomes, I can have this or I can have that. And so being able to slice and dice your expenses and your budget into the categories where you can have those conversations, you can assess risk, and you can say, I can float the boat this far, and I can't float the boat any further with the amount of money I have available to me. And therefore, we acknowledge these are the risks from where we sit, and there's some mitigation I can take to kind of buffer that a little bit, but we are exposed in other ways. And that's some of that fundamental management discipline that we've kind of lost track of, that we started this with, which is which allows us to be resilient, which allows us to make business decisions about how IT operates, as opposed to just running the 1,000 miles a minute, which we were talking about when we opened this up. Anything else to add there, Travis? Did I miss anything?
It's all on point. No, you're preaching to the choir there. It sounded great.
Awesome. Thanks, you two. So we got time for one last question, I'd say, and so I'd like to ask Dennis Dennis's question here. Dennis is asking a question about the extent to which organizations are starting to take security more seriously. It's going to the IT risk planning, but in particular, are we seeing more investment into security? Is that happening more specifically in any industries in particular, more than others? Is that something that we can expect more of in 2021 and beyond? So is all this the SolarWinds hype and the buzz, is it leading to actual dollars being spent, or can we see that yet? And if so, are there any industries that would we call out, or is it more pan industry? Everyone's kind of impacted the same way.
What are your thoughts there, Susan? I have some thoughts here, but I want to defer to you. I mean, for me, it's been very much pan industry.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from my clients is the need to justify the additional spend, but not actually having been all that successful yet, other than maybe a very reactive, tactical, oh, we got to buy one of these kind of things. But as far as increasing the overall security budget, still we've got to do it, but not a lot of success yet. We do actually have a blueprint, I believe, if I'm correct, that addresses building a security focused budget and aligning the justification and how to stick handle that through. And it is the conversation that happens at every board table: risk and opportunity, and what risk do you cover off, and what risk do you just accept as part of your exposure, and you will cover off if you have to. Right. So that's my view of what's going on right now. Travis?
Yeah, very much aligned. It's been, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about it. I've yet to see any tangible sort of results at the budgeting level.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and thank you folks for your questions. They're really interesting. As a call to action for our session today, we really encourage you to go and give the CIO Priorities Report a download and a read through. And if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach back out to us, and we'd love to answer them for you. And just to wrap up, if there's anyone that's not currently an InfoTech member and wants to learn more, please reach out to Mr. Dave Bell here. His contact information is on the slide. If you're interested in learning a bit more, reach out to Dave. And so for my co-hosts here, thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Travis. Craig, thank you for helping us out. And for all our listeners and question askers, thank you for your participation. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.